Welcome everyone. I am Jeffrey Goodman, the Director of Marketing and Development for the YMCA of Northwest Louisiana, and today is episode 11 of our new podcast interview series entitled Shreveport-Bossier, My City, My Community, My Home. I'm tickled to have today's guest, who is Carranza Pryor, and I think you'll learn more about why I'm tickled as we start to converse today. So Carranza, thanks very much for agreeing to be a part of this.
Oh, you're quite welcome. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. So we'll hop on in. Carranza has not seen the questions, just like every other guest. So let's start with a little background. You graduated from Captain Shreve in 1987, and I happened to graduate from Captain Shreve in 1992. And man, did your legacy loom large. It was mind-boggling how many times one of my teachers bragged on the greatness that was Carranza Pryor. I don't want to embarrass you, but I do want to single out quickly a few of your accomplishments. Valedictorian of Captain Shreve, National Merit Scholar, Governor at Louisiana Boys State, Undergraduate Degree with honors from Harvard, Law degree from Yale, and now Chief Counsel of LSU Health Shreveport. You moved away for a long time, living in Cambridge, New Haven, Birmingham, Charlotte, Atlanta. I may have missed a few.
No, I think you got it.
Okay. So all of that to get to my question, which is, Carranza, what did you notice when you returned to live in Shreveport-Bossier? What felt the same? What felt different?
Sure. Well, if you don't mind, before I
Please
go into that, I've got to personalize this a little bit because this is really an honor for me to be here. And I think I've mentioned this to you before, but your family has been an important part of my life, my family, forever. In fact, when I was born here in Shreveport at Highland Hospital, back when it used to be on Highland, I apparently there was some issue with the shape of my foot. And your father, an orthopedist, who from what I understand may have been a resident, he was very early on in his career, he helped correct that. And my whole life, and I know the relationship was more than that. My grandmother, my mother knew your family, your parents, and there was a friendship there. But that episode, that involvement, that connection has been strong with me and my family. So just getting a chance to spend this time with you in whatever context is great, but you and your family have meant a whole lot to me, and in a very literal sense have helped put me on firm footing to do whatever I have been able to do, in which I'm fortunate, and I'm fortunate to have a chance to be back. So, and with all of that, so the question kind of, what have I noticed? What's different about Shreveport?
What's different? What's the same? And what jumped out at you when you first got back here, or since you've been back?
Sure. So it's interesting because it's really a different perspective of a place when you're a child growing up and then when you're an adult, especially when there's been such a gap. So some of the differences may not have been differences, it's just a matter of perspective and seeing this place with new eyes and from a different vantage point. But I would say that I feel, though, pretty confident that some of the things that are the same, it's still, it's some, good and bad, it's still very much, very livable, easy to get around place. A very strong church-going, faith-based community. On the maybe not so great side, there still is a fair amount of distrust between different communities, sometimes along, racial lines. There's also there's also just a concern, I guess, about the future of the city and its long-term progress and growth. When I was growing up here, a lot of people who had talent and opportunities to go elsewhere seemed to do that. And and that was that's one reason why I came back. I was always at the time thinking, well, so many of these great people are not coming back to Shreveport. I want to be the exception, and it's something I didn't think it would take me this long to do so. But today, there's still concern about what's Shreveport's future like. I know there was in the paper read a study that Shreveport was one of the measured against communities of its size or larger, may have one of the slowest growing, if there was any growth at all, communities or metropolitan areas in the country. So that outflow of people and talent is unfortunately still the case. So that's very much the same. In terms of differences, though, there is, from what I see, and again, some of this may be just a different vantage point. There's a strong progressive element that I don't recall. I mean, I remember in school, not really reading many, for instance, black authors are learning about the contributions of African Americans in culture and academics and society, but I don't see that so much the case anymore. There's a greater awareness of the larger world and the contributions of others in Shreveport. There is a larger influx, so there are a lot of people who are not from here who have contributed to some of that greater awareness. So there's some inputs and some that help to, I think, shape the city, and the city is thinking about things in ways that they hadn't thought about them before. And also there's a greater outward-looking scope, the understanding that we can't be so insular and have to look to solutions that they may not come from, right at home, but they may come from outside. But also I've noticed sort of in, Louisiana, in general, there's a lot of that insularity. It seems like structures and laws and systems are set up to try to keep people here and focus on the people who are here, as opposed to looking out and trying to attract folks from other communities and outside the state, in terms of preferences that are given for scholarships or tuition, consideration for jobs, laws requiring you to have a Louisiana license plate card, registration and driver's license in the state if you're going to work for the state government, which makes it maybe less attractive for people from outside. Not to get to, I guess, controversial comments. But anyway, that's not so much that law itself, but just the spirit of it seems to, and I know it was well-meaning, but the spirit of it seems to maybe be more of an obstacle to the idea that we need to draw in talent and to help the city grow. So those are, I guess, some of the differences I have. It's also interesting to me that there are, I guess I had seen this then, but I guess it struck me stronger now, but the North Louisiana, South Louisiana tension, I don't think I thought much about Baton Rouge obviously I knew that was the capital. New Orleans was a place to visit, and Bourbon Street and Mardi Gras and all of that. But I didn't quite appreciate maybe I should say the regard or lack of regard that there seems to be in that part of the state for North Louisiana. And some of that has to do with the fact that that's a part of my job. I'm as Chief Counsel of LSU, but I'm part of the larger LSU system. And then we have a joint venture, LSU Health Sciences Center Shreveport, with Ochsner, which is based in New Orleans. So I'm on calls and a lot of dealings with folks who are in that part of the state. And it's I'm sure no surprise to a lot of people who are watching here, but came as a bit more of a surprise to me than I had appreciated. It's not animosity, but just the lack of, I guess I said lack of regard, but there is a feeling that that Shreveport's ideas or Shreveport's ability to contribute or North Louisiana's contributions to the state are not as strong as those of, and the talent up here is not as strong as those in South Louisiana. And, whether that is or is not objectively true, there should be a greater sense of partnership and collegiality and oneness, and I don't see as much of that. We're kind of maybe more of an afterthought too often. We're up here in the hinterlands, they say, which is just strange. I mean, I grew up here, so maybe if I grew up in New Orleans, I'd feel the same way. But I would hope that people in that part of the state would kind of get over that and appreciate us for who and what we are. Sorry, that was really maybe seemed meandering or long, but anyway, thank you for letting me, go there.
Absolutely, no, that was fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
And some of what you said brings me to my next question. So, if Shreveport-Bossier had 5 to 10 Carranza Pryors every year who we exported for college, but who then returned to live here, I can't even imagine how much better this community would be for it. What's the secret from your perspective? How do we get more of our exceptional kids like you to want to come back here to live?
Well, some of it is, I guess, opportunity, of course. Jobs. A lot of, and have friends who I grew up with who live in other places, and we've talked a little bit about this. And one of the things they say, well, the job that I have wherever I am, usually it's a larger city. That opportunity is not in Shreveport. The thing that I do now, I couldn't do in Shreveport because those employers, those industries are not there. So, as any community needs to do, the recruitment of companies and industries is key. So that's one thing, and it's easy for me to say. And I know that's something that people. It's not like no one's been working on that or are working on that. We are. So that's one. Some of it also is some maybe more cultural, and I come at this from a particular point of view, but some people may not be attracted to the idea of coming here if they're to a community where they're, I don't know, although I know as we speak this is being changed, there's a Confederate statue in front of the courthouse. That doesn't feel particularly welcoming, and the resistance and insistence on keeping it there. So, and then there's generally, the conservative nature now, ideas, and that's just something that may not be able to be helped. But a number of people who, at least who I've been around, would be more drawn to come back and be in this community if they felt that there were more people like-minded than they are. Now, again, I appreciate it. We don't all need to think the same way about anything. And in fact, one of the reasons that I tried to sell coming back here to my wife, who's not from Shreveport, is, well, we have so much of this, of people self-segregating and segmentation of society, people going to areas where they are more comfortable, where people think like they are. But the only way for this community, this country to progress is if we have greater interaction. And so, even though, obviously not everyone in Shreveport may not think like I do or agree with my ideas, but there are a lot who do. So it's let's go back and let's have civil conversations. We're not here to proselytize, though. Someone who I know this community knows very well, Mac McCarter. I knew him years ago, and one of the things he said that always has stuck with me is that Christ, and I guess it was the why I feel I can say this. Christ didn't preach or didn't convert by beating people over the head about things. He just, he lived his life. He preached his word, and people just have to come to that. And again, I'm not here to try to convince anyone to think the way I am, but but I do want people to be civil and to be open-minded and to understand that what's important is that we kind of come together, and we have problems that all of us have to deal with, and we have to come to try to solve those together. I think education, wanting to improving our educational system. That's something most communities would say. that our, as well as our healthcare outcomes, this area, not just North Louisiana, but also somewhat the region, have poor healthcare outcomes. The prospects for children born here are not very good. Those statistics bear that out. So one of the reasons I wanted to come to LSU Health Science Center is because that's obviously a big factor in trying to change that, and that's the work that institution does. But actually, more than anything that I could do, I think the biggest contribution I made was bringing my wife here to work there. She's an actual physician who's on the front lines of making those changes, and wisely the school has put her and is putting her in a position to have a direct impact on those outcomes and trying to turn things around. So I don't know, I may be at 4, I guess, but also just, I think, having people go out, having things like this where you interview and have people of different perspectives speak, kind of saying why they've come back to Shreveport, would be helpful. So someone who might have that spark in them, see this, that spark will ignite and actually lead to them wanting to come back, whether it's because family's here, whether because they want to, some nostalgic reason, whether they decide, well, I want to make a difference in the world, and I'm going to start in my hometown. Booker T. Washington once famously said, drop your bucket where you are, rather than looking somewhere to make your mark or contribution. Right at home is where you can start.
And talk a little more about health outcomes. What does that mean exactly? Because I'm not terribly familiar with that.
Right.
That term.
So I mean things as basic as life expectancy, childhood morbidity. When a child is born, the likelihood that child is going to survive. The likelihood that the mother is going to survive childbirth. Also the prospects of that child that they're going to survive. Also the rates of cancer. The incidence and then deaths from cancer are high in North Louisiana, disproportionately so. I mean, we don't have this, even within the state, if you compare us to South Louisiana, obviously population, and there are more people in South Louisiana, yet our incidence and outcomes and consequences of cancer are more severe in North Louisiana.
And what do you attribute? People attribute that to the level of physician care? Or people attribute that to the lack of health and wellness in this part of the country? What are the main causes to some of those more negative health outcomes?
So there are many people who are more qualified to answer that than I am. But I would say that some of the factors are like you've identified some of them. One, we need more and better, primary care physicians in this area, because a lot of these issues it's a matter of that they haven't been addressed, initially they haven't been diagnosed quickly enough and then dealt with. So that's right, and there's a great effort to try to increase the number of physicians, particularly primary care, internal medicine physicians in the area. And then that would actually help feed some of the other factors such as, diet, improve those areas such as diet, seeing your doctor on a regular basis. Also, I guess violence is a part of it, which kind of goes into, more the criminal justice system as opposed to the health, but, rates from homicide or other factors like that. So those are some of the issues, and there may be some that are access to health care. The growth, as largely out of it because of COVID, but of telehealth and telemedicine may be a way of really trying to counter that, because if they can't get to the physicians, we can use technology to get the physicians to people and help them to and improve their health and their lives. So those are some of those factors that may help. And then poverty, when you're in order to have a healthier diet and live in a healthier community, which affects your life expectancy. a lot of that's a definite direct result of your resources. So those are all sort of factors that, unfortunately, this area is doesn't really is not great at, doesn't come out great on studies. So those are factors that we can try to address.
That's helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so I tend to like this next question. You have a friend from Harvard who has never been to Shreveport-Bossier before come to stay with you. He or she is only in town for one full day. Where do you take him or her to give a sense of your Shreveport-Bossier?
Wow. Well, the first thing is I would take him or her to a couple of places to eat, so to get a po' boy and or fried catfish or shrimp. So, and there are a lot of places you could choose from. So the food and what they can, and which is great here. So that's one thing. I'd take them to see the Red River and the like Cyport and Barnwell and those facilities there. I guess I should take them to the casino as well. I don't frequent that too much. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but that's definitely been a real staple in this community since then. I would also go by the courthouse that I refer to, but not so much to see any statue, but it's actually an historic building. Harry Truman, the president at the end of World War II, when he was kind of a bureaucrat in Missouri, he was working on studying, the construction of the courthouse there in Missouri, where he's from, and he toured, and one of the places he came was to Shreveport to look at our courthouse as a model for there. So anyway, there's a lot of beautiful architecture in this community. So probably showing also taking around to see some of the churches, particularly some of the older historic ones like Holy Trinity, Holy Cross, to see not only for the architecture, but showing how important that religion is in this community. Is that kind of
absolutely?
Yeah,
and where do you go to church, if I may ask?
So actually, I go to which is another story, but First Presbyterian Church here. I did not grow up in that church coming here, but in our wanderings when we were in North Carolina, we joined the Presbyterian Church and have kind of stayed with that denomination, my family.
And what church did you grow up going to here?
Actually, New Hope Baptist Church, which is on Hearn Avenue, near the corner of Hearn and Harp.
Okay.
I think they rebuilt the building, but that's where I grew up. And before that, my family, so when I say before that, before I was born even, my mother and grandparents were members of Little Union Baptist Church, which is a historic church here. And then they left and helped found and form New Hope Baptist Church. I guess that would have been in the 50s or 60s or so.
Yeah, and this isn't one of my questions, but just hearing you say grandmother, I don't know if we're talking about the mother shed side.
We are, that's what I'm talking about.
Talk a little bit about kind of the mother sheds and your grandparents and just what their involvement was in the community. They were very, I think, very important to this community. So give us a little background of who they were and some of the aspects of the community in which they were involved.
Sure, well, thanks. So yeah, my grandparents were Reverend Carranza and Lillian Mothershed. So Carranza is how that name came into my family. He was named for the president of Mexico when he was born in East Texas, Bloomberg, Texas. And it's a last name, but we use it in our family as a first name. But my grandma, so he was from East Texas, but my grandmother's from Shreveport, and as far as I know, even her grandparents were from this area, so we go way, way back, at least that far in this community. And she was born in 1919 and grew up, I guess now it's the Pine Hill Road in North Louisiana, almost to Blanchard, and would talk about her grandfather walking her downtown to go to the store. But she was in education. She started out teaching in a one-room schoolhouse in Rodessa for like grades 1 through high school, and she was the one teacher in there. She went on to work in materials resource, basically she got her master's in library studies, and so she helped with at the central office, I guess they call it, with the school board, helping to managing resources for the black schools, because the schools were segregated at the time. So making sure, in charge of making sure like the books and materials that they would go to the black schools in town. She went on to become the principal of, and I'm sure I'm skipping a bunch of stuff in her career, but she went on to become the principal of Northside Elementary School, which is in what's we call the Cooper Road area. And so she bought, she had, in my grandfather and my mother and her siblings who grew up in the Lakeside area. But when she got that job in that area, she moved and bought a house. They moved up there in like 1968 or so. And that's relevant because shortly after she was principal there, I hope I can draw the name of it, but in the effort to integrate schools in Caddo Parish, maybe they call it the crossover, that was the name of it. There was a program, among other things, to move administrators in black schools to predominantly white schools, and vice versa. White administrators would go to black schools. So in her case, she was reassigned to become principal at University Elementary School, which you couldn't be further away, from where she had to drive to where she then became principal, from all the way, like I said, up near Blanchard to South Shreveport. And of course, now Shreveport goes even further south, but back then that probably was as far south, as you could go past cotton fields to get out to university. So, and I can't remember the exact date, it was somewhere in the early 70s, so she became the principal there. And those, I guess to some extent have been documented, but that was a different time, and so there were certain challenges that went there, but she had tremendous support that helped her through that. One person in particular I mentioned is Katina Boris, who was her counselor, and is was a counselor there, but was tremendously helpful. Nancy Rayburn, a number of people who were there in administration and were supportive of her, and I think she's had a tremendous impact. So much of life and understanding is just about talking to people and having exposure to people. So now there's at least 10 years worth of kids who, I don't know, I can't speak for them. I'm not sure what their exposure to or how many black people they had come across in their lives, but they had a black principal and black teachers somewhat as a result of having a black principal. And wherever they go, wherever they live, whoever they vote for, whatever their leanings, that will always stick with them. And I think her manner, her professionalism, her effectiveness, I've never heard, everything I've ever heard has been positive about the influence and the work that she did, not just those kids, but their parents and their families. So I think she had a tremendous impact on achieving her immediate purpose, which was helping to integrate the schools, but also helping to change, or not so much change, but create the proper perceptions that we're all just alike. We all work hard, and you can't judge a person just because of the color of their skin. My grandfather, like I said, was born in East Texas, and even though they lived in Shreveport, he really hewed strongly to those ties. He was a pastor. He came to that later in life. Like I said, they were members of Little Union, and he was a deacon and like the treasurer of the church, but was not a pastor. But as an adult, I had been born at this point. He found the call, and he went back to pastor the church he grew up in, Bloomberg. But he didn't move. His family was here, so, and Bloomberg was just an hour away. But all growing up, it was a regular thing. At least twice a week, sometimes 5 times a week. He and she would drive to Bloomberg to pastor that church, and then to attend all of the different East Texas or Texas Baptist associations and meetings. It was a constant thing, and then going to the National Baptist Convention and Congress of Christian Education. So that was very big part of my life in following them around and the influence they had. So in his, like I said, he came late to life to being a pastor. He wanted to get a divinity degree, and New Orleans Theological Seminary offered one, and they had a satellite at Broadmoor Baptist Church. So he actually enrolled, and I mean, he had to have been in his 70s, maybe 60s. I have to get the dates right. But was a student, and the Times here did an article on that. And he was a student and received his degree from New Orleans Theological Seminary as a grandfather. Tom Harrison, Dr. Tom Harrison, I know you've had here before. They got to meet through that, and Tom was terrific. Tom's been a great friend to me as well. So. And I think, a lot of my grandfather was beloved not only in East Texas but also here. My grandmother may have had the more remarkable sort of influence in terms of people knowing her and having been in education, remembering her and her contributions, and she made a lot of friends in a lot of different areas, politically, legally, medically. So people here in Shreveport tend to remember her more, but they were definitely a team and much loved by folks. So I hope that was somewhat an answer. And like I had mentioned earlier, your father and my grandmother were great friends.
Yeah, I didn't know most of that, so that's great. All right, so this next question might be slightly unfair with no easy answers, but the question is, how do we grow as a community into something that more closely resembles Birmingham, Charlotte, or Atlanta?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? Bold, and this is so trite, I guess, but bold leadership is a big part of it. Being, creative and thinking of ways of changing structures and relationships that will work for attracting business and talent here. The Health Sciences Center is a tremendous asset to the community. So focusing on maintaining its viability and growing it's an opportunity to, people coming to work there is a way of bringing other ideas and other communities and other families to Shreveport, and it already has. So all we can do and I don't just say that as an employee of the institution, but I think anyone who cares about Shreveport would say the same. Continue to support and build it, and making sure that it stays here is not that there's a fear of it leaving, imminent threat of that, but that would be very important. Birmingham, one thing I think that grew it is it was flexible. Birmingham, and actually having lived there, I spent a good deal of time, even before, I spent a good bit of time studying Birmingham's growth and actually being a part of that community. That was a real formative time in my life. So Birmingham, as everyone knows, sort of started out as a steel town. It grew. It was founded because it had a unique. It was unique in that three ingredients for making steel were all located there, and so industry came and the steel industry grew up. But as that sort of died out, the city was able to transition into other areas, in particular healthcare. And the University of Alabama, Birmingham has been a real driver of that community. And the effort to build up that medical institution is part of an undergraduate, a whole university or campus as well. But building up the medical component has really done a lot to grow to Birmingham. And then the businesses that sort of supported that have just helped that community to grow. Atlanta has been a study for its history of really boosterism and promoting itself. One of the things that helped it is it has always had a strong middle class, a business civic elite. And when I say elite, I don't mean that they were elitist in the sense that you often hear that bandied about now, but they were people they were people who had businesses and they were truly invested in the community. And as the community grew and thrived, so their businesses and their livelihoods would grow and thrive. So, Atlanta became known as the city too busy to hate, because they knew that racial strife was not good business. That was not a good way of drawing people to making it attractive, particularly people from, say, the North that were turned off by that, as well as its own, black community who would want to leave if, and wouldn't want to live if they had that opportunity and live in a community that was stifling and didn't present and provide opportunities or equal opportunities for them. So having that leadership from that segment meant that when conflict was on the rise, or was on the horizon, they quickly stepped up, and they brought parties together to say, we've got issues, let's deal with them, but let's deal with them in a way that reflects positively on us and doesn't tear down this city. And so that's the bold leadership that I'm talking about. So, and that's largely about crossing lines, cultural, racial, economic, and getting people together to pursue that common cause of growing the community for themselves, for their children, for posterity. And then Charlotte has been, they were really kind of interestingly a strong banking center. At one point, two of, I think, the four largest banks in the country were based in Charlotte. And even though that's not necessarily the case so much, those are still very strong industry. It's a very strong industry in Charlotte. So, and it has attracted a lot of people from outside the community who live there, and they've brought their ideas, and that mix has caused other industries to grow. So in Charlotte's case, I would say a large part of its growth is the fact that it's been really open to outsiders coming in. I mean, if you go to Charlotte, and you meet someone who's from Charlotte, much less who's got from the generations of Charlotteans, that's a rare find. So I would think its openness and its openness to bringing other people in to help to bring their talent and their thoughts and their new ideas have been things that have grown it. So I guess in sum, I would say from those examples and having lived in those places, building our health sciences center here, looking to our business, our business owners, entrepreneurs for leadership and giving them a real say in all strata of our society, of our community and issues. And also, like I said earlier, really inviting and encouraging people to come and take a look, whether it's my classmate from Harvard, or the listener's cousin from California. It's a very livable place. It's a place there's great value, kind of use an economic term, to come here and to help build something, and not only will you reap those benefits, economically, but also in just the satisfaction of having really made a difference in a place, which is what you're doing here, and which I really applaud.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Well, go back, because I was going to ask you a little bit about the statement bold leadership anyway, and you talked a little bit about it, but I mean, what is that DNA? What does that person look like? What do they feel like? What are the characteristics that make up a bold leader? Is it someone that doesn't care what anyone else thinks? Is it someone that is fully invested in making their community a better place and isn't corrupt, isn't doing it for ego, isn't doing it for financial gain? I mean, what you're in a laboratory. I mean, you've been a leader for most of your life. I mean, what is that? What exactly defines a bold leader, and what are some of those character traits that you associate with someone who you would describe as such?
Well, I think you actually touched on two of the key parts of what makes up that person. One, they don't care about what others think of them, but I don't mean in the sense that they then they don't care about what others think in service of their own self-interest, but they don't care what others think as they pursue what's in the best interest of the community, and they're they're not so beholden and tied to remaining in office or keeping their position or whatever advantage that has given them, but they put the community and the best interests of the community first. Maybe that means for a short tenure, but hopefully not. And people are wise enough and thirsty enough for someone to help guide them, that person will find the support they need to continue to be a voice and a leader in our community. So that also, by bold leadership, I guess I mean being willing to look outside. I know our mayor has brought in folks from Harvard Business School to bring their ideas to this community. I think that's a wonderful idea. So being open to that sort of thing, but also being willing to, not just being willing, but truly representing this entire community, not staying in or trying just to strictly appeal to your base or your constituency. Maybe analysts or consultants will tell you that's the way to continue to be in office, but if you represent this community, or even if you just represent a part of this community, I want to see you in every community around here. And yes, you may go into places that may appear to be hostile, but you've got to go there. I mean, that's what you signed up for. You have to take into account all of the interests here, and that's I don't just deny that that's difficult. We all want to be loved. We all want to stay in our comfort zones in a large way, and if there's a path that allows us to hold and wield power and sort of avoid conflict, there's great temptation to take that, but you can't do that. So bold leadership looks bigger than that, and you're not going, and understands that you're not going to be able to satisfy everyone, but you're going to do your best and accept that it's not about you. And I know I'm saying things that are not. These are timeless sort of values and attitudes, but they.
And how does someone become that? Like who makes a bold leader? How does someone evolve or develop into that person? Are they taught that? Are they taught that by their parents? Are they taught that by what leads someone to become that person?
I think it'd be a lot of things. I think you're right. It could be something. It's just the way that you're raised can do that. I have to say that practically speaking, some of it could just be someone who you have to have the wherewithal. For instance, if you have, and that's maybe why we see so many really affluent or wealthy people as politicians, because regardless of how their political career pans out, they're still going to be able to support themselves and their family. So, and they can say what they have to say and don't have to, without having to be worried about saying something that will appeal to potential donors. So, and maybe that's why we need some type of campaign finance reform, so that we don't have to so that it's not only those who are wealthy who can have that kind of independence that a bold leader would need to have. So, in our making it, I know there's got to be also some way of, and I know I talked about having courage, which is, I guess, what it boils down to go into communities and to face criticism and to look people in the eye who may, disagree with you and deal with them. But, these days sometimes seems to have actually become dangerous. And so we have to, so that person has to have an ability to, one, not only have the courage to cross those lines, but also an ability to build relationships even where there's great difference. So those are, I guess, some of the factors or some of the things that we need that bold leader to have and do. It would be great if the community would support that, and maybe we can set up some institutions or resources that even, in the face of hostility, that will still, buttress those people so they can continue to the next day go back out into the fray and and try to do the work to build this community. Does that make some sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it sounds to me like you almost have to have someone who's willing to risk everything, risk everything financially, risk potentially their life to make this sort of progress.
That sounds dramatic, but you're not far off. I think you're right. It may require that, and I know some of it just may be being able to. It's like maybe you're born with it to some extent. Just people who are able to have those difficult conversations and not personalize it too much or be so terribly defensive that in raising who kind of bring the temperature down as opposed to escalating matters, if that's possible.
Okay, so we're down to our final two questions. They're shorter in terms of the length of the questions. You have as much room.
Well, it's not the questions; it's my responses.
No,
that's been the problem.
No, they're fantastic. This is what we want. All right, so the first question is, and you've covered this a little bit, but what makes you prideful of Shreveport-Bossier?
Well, one is just being from here, and you said being from here personally, my family's being from here for generations, and thankfully I'm proud of their contributions here. So that's a big part of it. This is probably going to sound totally trivial, but I'm prideful. I don't think there is another city named Shreveport. Anywhere. So, and I know that would be strange if there were, given the origins of our name, but I kind of take pride. Even though I live in Atlanta, but there's an Atlanta, Texas, and Atlanta, Georgia. Again, maybe silly, but I actually take some pride in that. I take pride in the fact that, I talk about the people who've left and gone to other places, but I take a good deal of pride in those accomplishments. I mean, there's rich soil here that's grown that, these people. I mean, and to attempt to name them is, I know, futile, but Johnny Cochran, Terry Bradshaw, or who've spent some time here. Charlie Cook, the Cook Political Report, went to high school at Captain Shreve. My parents, they're friends of mine who are out, whether they're in Washington D.C. or Chicago or Atlanta, who are or in schools, in Ivy League or at University of Arkansas, who are doing well, making good names for themselves and reputations, and when they do that, that reflects so well upon Shreveport. So I take pride in all those things, and the promise of the future. I mean, I really do think that there's great value here, and I'm glad to be here, and look forward to the opportunity to see this community not only just struggle to survive, but to thrive.
And then lastly, Carranza, similar, but what makes you hopeful about the future of Shreveport-Bossier?
Well, I'm hopeful because of the number of people who I see working and committed to it, and these could be people who've lived here for all their lives, or people who are new to the community. But I meet so many who are concerned about what this city is going to look like in the future, also today. And a lot of that reason maybe because they have children who are here, who live and are in school, and they're worried, as they should be, as we all should be, about their safety, their education, their prospects. So I see so many people here, and very talented and bright people who share those concerns, and working not only independently but together to make the future brighter here. I see a lot of natural resources that bode well for us. I think it's a beautiful area. Just looking around, not only the waterways with Cross Lake and the Red River, and the communities surrounding communities outside of Shreveport. So there's a lot of just natural beauty here, and also the fact that it's not so crowded. I've lived in communities that are really tight, where it can take you 2 hours to drive 2 miles at certain times of the day, but you don't have that problem here. There's more elbow room, and I think that that leads to more. That probably opens the opportunity for there to be more hospitality and civility, because we're just not so much on top of one another. So we don't have to become New York City, but I think that we can. There's a great opportunity for us to grow, to attract more people here, bring other ideas, and I tell you, if nothing else, if we could get a Trader Joe's here, that I think we would have met our goal. That'd be a game changer. So anyway, but I'm really hopeful. I'm hopeful because my wife is here. She's a remarkable, dynamic person, and like I said, the greatest contribution I could make was to have her here, and she's doing a lot of that work and trying to address the health disparities here in this community. And she's done more than I have to try to recruit talent to come here. I hope not to jinx it, but there's no geriatrician here. And in a community that has a lot of people who could use that, and she's recruiting someone to come here to do that. So just because she's here, I'm very hopeful for this community as well.
Well, I'm hopeful with sitting across from people like you. We're super and so fortunate to have you back here, and I'm excited to see what the future holds with Carranza Pryor back at home, and look forward to seeing much more of you, and really appreciate you doing this today.
Well, it's good to be home. Thank you very much, Jeffrey.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.